Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Our series is entitled, Welcome, Holy Spirit. Understanding the Book of Acts, Part 1, which is chapters 1 to 12. A verse-by-verse audio commentary, part of the larger Understanding the Bible series. And we are still looking at Stephen's speech in a longer than usual chapter, Acts chapter 7. Stephen is answering the ludicrous charges of blasphemy leveled against him by the Jewish council called the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. And instead of defending himself, he's going to tell Israel's history and show how the religious establishment are the real ones to have blasphemed, resisted the Holy Spirit, and even done evil to the Messiah of God. So this is called Stephen's Speech, Part 5, Moses' Divine Appointment. Acts 7:30 to 36. So after Moses spent 40 years in Midian, at the age of 80, the angel of the Lord appears to him in the burning bush. Now, of course, tradition tells us that it's in the Sinai Peninsula, administered by Egypt, where you have Mount Sinai in St. Catherine's Monastery at the foot of Sinai as the place where Moses encountered God. But you know, the funny thing is that Moses was in Midian, and Midian is in Arabia. And according to Galatians chapter 4 and verse 25, the Apostle Paul tells us that Mount Sinai is in Arabia. Mount Sinai and the foot of it, which is, of course, in Midian. So whether Sinai is in the peninsula called Sinai or across the Red Sea in Midian, in what is now Saudi Arabia, all we know is that God sent his angel to speak to Moses, and basically the very man that was rejected by the Israelite people 40 years earlier, who made you a ruler and judge over us, was actually going to be appointed by God and enter into the greatest role of his entire life. Now, what he did is when he saw the bush burning, he drew near to God. He wanted to see what's going on here. Why is this bush on fire, but it's never, ever consumed? And then from the midst of the bush, God speaks to Moses. And God identifies himself as the God of the patriarchs, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And from all this, God is going to basically even give Moses his divine name, although it doesn't so much mention that in Acts 7, but of course in Exodus. The divine name, Yahweh, Jehovah, YHWH, the Tetragrammaton. These are basically the letters or the pronunciation of the letters, which is the name of God. We don't know the exact way of pronouncing it because the vowels are not there and nobody's telling us the right vowels. But what I do know is we have a name which we can pronounce, vowels and all, the name given to us among men whereby we must be saved, and that name is Jesus. So God identifies himself, and then he tells Moses to remove his shoes because he's standing on holy ground. Then God makes a declaration after Moses takes off his shoes. Now that Moses has obeyed God and positioned himself to hear from God, God says twice, I have seen the oppression of my people. I have heard their groanings, and now I'm coming down to deliver them, and I will deliver them through you. And Moses now is being honored by God by being appointed the ruler and deliverer through the angel that appeared to him in the bush. And so, of course, the result of this is that Moses will be used by God to deliver his people from the Egyptians despite oppression, slavery, ensnaring them into where they were living, and they were cut loose to go not just to the wilderness to worship and sacrifice to God, but to go all the way to the land of promise. Let me read to you one verse here. It says in verse 36 of Acts 7, he brought them out after he had showed wonders and signs in the land of Egypt, and in the Red Sea, and in the wilderness 40 years. We've learned Moses' life is compartmentalized 3 40-year periods, and we're getting to the last of those 3. Let's now read the entire section here, because our lesson is called Stephen's Speech, Part 5, Moses' Divine Appointment. And our readings from Acts 7, verses 30 to 36. Again, it's Acts 7, 30 to 36. And it reads, "And when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of fire in a bush. When Moses saw it, he wondered at the sight, and as he drew near to behold it, the voice of the Lord came unto him, saying, I am the God of thy fathers, the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Then Moses trembled and durst not behold. Then said the Lord to him, Put off thy shoes from thy feet, for the place where thou standest is holy ground. I have seen the affliction of my people which is in Egypt, and I have heard their groaning, and have come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send thee into Egypt. This Moses, whom they refuse, saying, Who made thee a ruler and a judge? The same did God send to be a ruler and a deliverer by the hand of the angel which appeared to him in the bush. He brought them out after that he had showed wonders and signs in the land of Egypt, and in the Red Sea, and in the wilderness 40 years. Once again, our lesson is called Stephen's Speech, Part 5, Moses' Divine Appointment. Acts 7, 30 to 36. Remember, this is Stephen speaking in his defense against the charges of blasphemy before the Jewish council in Jerusalem. So it begins with after 40 years. Now, Moses' first 40 years were spent as Pharaoh's daughter's adopted son in the court of the Egyptians. His second period of 40 years, he would be exiled out of Egypt for killing the Egyptian who was oppressing the Israelite. So he spends that second 40-year period in Midian, which is in northwestern Saudi Arabia, and he would become the son-in-law of Jethro, the husband of Zipporah, and the father of 2 sons. At the end of that second 40-year period, Moses was now an 80-year-old man, probably in very, very good shape. The angel of the Lord appears to him in a flame of fire in a bush. Now, while Mount Sinai in south-central Sinai Peninsula comes to mind, remember that Mount Sinai, with its famous St. Catherine's Monastery, which is, I think, about 1,400 years old. It's an amazing place, the monastery, Greek Orthodox. But I understand that the identification of the mount as Sinai, where St. Catherine's is built in the Sinai Peninsula, only happened in the 6th century A.D., probably around 2,000 years after the time of Moses. So there is another possibility of where Mount Sinai is located, and that could be in Midian itself. In fact, there are reports that there is a Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, in the northwest. It has a fence around it, and it's guarded day and night. I don't know if this is true or not. You can always look on the internet for that. But what I know is that Paul says in Galatians 4:25, Mount Sinai is in Arabia, which is close to where Moses lived for 40 years in Midian. All I can tell you is, regardless of the exact location, in any case, his encounter at the Holy Mount changed the world. All right, and then I just might tell you a quaint story. I was at the St. Catherine's Monastery years ago, leading a Holy Land tour. We were guided by a Greek Orthodox priest. Of course, he wore long black robes, had a big, deep, black, bushy beard, and black hair pulled into a ponytail. He takes us to a bright green bush. I mean, it's as green as can be. And then he says, with no fanfare and with perfect aplomb, this is the burning bush. Now, of course, I'm with Australian pilgrims. And Aussies can be, let's face it, a little bit on the skeptical side. But I have to admit, what I saw, I will never forget. Half of the pilgrims, as soon as the priest said, this is the burning bush, they whip out their cameras and snap, 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 snap. But the other half, more on the classic Aussie mode, they weren't so sure. And right in front of the priest, they asked me, do you reckon this really is the burning bush? What do I do? The priest is standing there. He's heard it. He's waiting for my reply. Am I going to basically call him a liar, or am I going to affirm him? What am I going to do? So I just took what I thought was a most neutral position, and I said, well, that's what the priest says. And that was the end of the matter. Okay, drawing near. Acts 7:31. This spectacular, possibly terrifying sight of the burning bush at the foot of Sinai attracted the attention of Moses. Of course, far from being repelled by this, he drew near to behold. And he did he did what any curious person would do. And as he drew close, God spoke to him from the bush. After all, he was getting too close for comfort and for safety as well. And then in Acts 7:32, he hears the identity of God. And he's told, I am the God of Abraham and of Isaac and of Jacob. In fact, the actual phrase he says is, I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. Hebrews 11, the chapter of faith, tells us God is not ashamed to be called our God, or God is not ashamed to call himself their God, the God of the patriarchs, the God of the people of faith, the God of the Christian church, because after all, when we respond to the gospel in faith and obedience, God becomes our God. When Moses heard God's voice, he trembled, and from that point he dare not look any more at the bush. All right, so at first he was intrigued by the bush, drawing close. Now he turns away because God had spoken. This was no longer just a tourist site. It was holy ground. And indeed, this is affirmed in Acts 7:33, because it says, God told Moses, remove your shoes, because where you are standing is holy ground. Now, those of you that are familiar with East Asia and other parts of the world, you know that people take off their shoes before entering into a home and sometimes even to a building. The ostensible reason is for hygiene or sanitation. However, the removing of the shoe may also be symbolic, representing the separation of the sanctity of the home from the dirt and corruption of the outside world. And, of course, the outside world's corruption is found on the shoes. So it's a very good thing. I do it all the time. And frankly, even in my own home, I like to take my shoes off because, well, it's holy ground. It's the place that God has given to us as a refuge, as a retreat, as a place of rest, and as a place of renewal. Acts 7 and verse 34. Let me read this one to you. It says, I have seen the affliction of my people, which is in Egypt, and I have heard their groaning, and have come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send thee into Egypt. Of course, this is God speaking. Twice God says the phrase, I have seen, I have seen. And when God repeats something, it's because he wants to make it emphatic. Because God may be in heaven, but he's really not far from each and every one of us. Nor is he disinterested, nor is he indifferent, nor is he uninvolved. But what you discover about the God of the Bible is he's passionately interactive in the affairs of his people. And that's the way it's always been. God sees, twice he says it, the affliction of his people in Egypt. Furthermore, God doesn't just see, he hears. So when they were groaning because of their affliction, they not only did it loud enough to be heard by other people, they did it loud enough to be heard by God. Or even if they whimpered, they would have still been heard by God. And here God comes down. He says, I have come down, obviously in the form of the burning bush, because our God, according to Hebrews 12:29, is a consuming fire. So he comes down into the flame of the burning bush, and what is he going to do about it? He's come down to deliver his people. Now God invites Moses to come so he can send him back to Egypt for the greatest mission of his life. Because remember the phrase, God's method is a man. And yes, God's method can also be a woman who's called and yielded to God. So this is God's declaration. He has chosen the very man that was rejected by his own people 40 years earlier when he slew the Egyptian while trying to reconnect with the Israelites. And in Acts 7:35, Moses is honored because Stephen makes this statement. This Moses whom they refused, saying, Who made thee a ruler and judge? The same did God send to be a ruler and a deliverer by the hand of the angel which appeared to him in the bush. Basically, he may have been the stone rejected of the builders, but God made him a ruler and deliverer through the angel. And what was the result? It's found in Acts 7, verse 36. He brought them out after he had shown wonders and signs in the land of Egypt and in the Red Sea and in the wilderness 40 years. So Moses, chosen of God, anointed of God, empowered of God as a mighty, mighty prophet, Israel, under his leadership, was delivered from the oppression of Egypt and the hand of Pharaoh. And this is after he had demonstrated signs and wonders in Egypt. But you know what? The signs and wonders didn't cease after he left Egypt. They continued on through the Red Sea, and also there were signs and wonders that happened in the wilderness. God is a God of the supernatural, and Jesus Christ, according to Hebrews 13, verse 8, is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Our lesson is called Stephen's Speech, Part 5, Moses' Divine Appointment. And our lesson for life is this: people can and do experience rejection, even from their own, only to have God vindicate and promote them in due time.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.